Just wanted to say a few words ahead of this video because these videos come off the back of a huge lot of Eaglemoss Star Trek ships that I picked up recently. And so I've put up all the duplicates on eBay for you to have a look at, and I'll include links around and about the place. So if you've got any sort of interest in getting hold of a few of these to have a look at them for yourself, you can do so for a while at least, because it looks like they're not going to go flying off the shelves. I've tried to price them quite reasonably, so do please go and have a look. And without further ado, I will get on with the main video. Cheers. Now, I must admit with this one, I'm breaking one of my own Eaglemoss collection rules, but I didn't set out to get this. It just came in my job lot. And there is one of these spare at the time of recording, still up for auction. This is the USS Kelvin from the 2009 Star Trek film, which I have said to myself I am not getting the Eaglemoss models for because I don't consider it to be part of my personal Star Trek timeline, if you see what I mean. Now, ironically, this ship is probably the closest ship in the film to a sort of original film era Star Trek ship, because that's kind of what they were going for. But this one really did my head in for the very simple reason that when I saw where its navigational deflector / engineering hull was, I felt it was upside down all the time. If you're from my generation of Trek, then you're used to seeing the navigational deflector underneath the saucer section with the nacelles on top. Now, granted, a Miranda class would be a slight exception to that, but then again, the Mirandas don't even have navigational deflectors, apparently, which is obviously a bit silly. But pretty much every other Federation ship you see of that era doesn't have this configuration. So I personally found that really confusing. I just couldn't figure out which way it was supposed to be flying. And because it's got top sort of vertical symmetry, and indeed horizontal symmetry almost, but because it's got the two very similar hull sections, top and bottom. For some reason, my brain just couldn't orientate that. I just found it really odd. I don't know if anyone else found that, but I just did. I found it odd. Now, what's interesting is the design process that it went through, because they were originally sort of looking at it as a sort of quite a sort of militaristic kind of vessel. And it is quite grey. It's a lot greyer and dirtier looking than the Enterprise is in this film. And indeed, as compared to most Star Trek Federation ships in the previous movies and other series, they tend to be brighter than this. But that is what they went for. And they gave it quite a lot of airtime. But of course, ironically, this ship predates Kirk. And I think it says on the cover that it was destroyed in 2233. So it's well past the NX era. And we're going into sort of, but it's pre-original series era as well. So it's kind of, it's I think they class it as a light cruiser. Yeah. So it's not as heavy duty as the Enterprise, because it is 30 years earlier than the Enterprise. So they wanted it to look not radically different, but by the same token, they want it to look older and more beaten up than the new flagship of the fleet, which makes perfect sense. So we've got here Kirk's father, George Kirk, who ends up in control of the ship temporarily, at least. But of course, it gets taken out by a ship that's from the original timeline in 2387. And there's no way it's going to survive past the first few minutes of the film, unfortunately. One thing that also irks me about this is NCC-0514. Why isn't it just NCC-514? Why have they bothered with a 0 in front of it? That puzzles me as well. But I could go on. But it's just the whole thing. It just looks upside down. I can't get past the upside down bit. I don't mind the overall design because it looks very much like a Constitution class saucer section. That I get. I've not zero problem with that whatsoever. That's exactly what it looks like, and I'm sure that I have seen, and I don't know whether it was like a blueprints book or something for the original series kind of era, but I'm sure I've seen a ship like that in there where it was a sort of single nacelle, but without that sort of source, that navigational deflector approach. But it's really reminding me of something. I might have to go and chase it down after I've filmed this. And these are all the various iterations it went through. We had sort of double nacelles and a single navigational deflector, but always interestingly with the deflector on top, it seems. Assuming that is top. I mean, I know it doesn't really matter in space. I know. But it's what I'm used to. I'm old. I like the stuff I'm used to. I can't help it. So they obviously decided that apparently they were thinking about the Reliant when they were designing this, and they wanted it to not look like the Enterprise. So I actually understand why visually they actually ended up adopting something that was very different, because they did not want it confused with the Enterprise, which ironically, of course, does adopt the more standard look that we're used to from the earlier films. But they said they wanted it a little bit more sort of motion picture-y relevant, perhaps, so it looks more like that era. And I think they did a nice job of it. They've noted in the text that the nacelle cap is very similar to the original series nacelle cap. They went for that sort of thing. But then they lit the deflector dish blue, which is more sort of motion picture movie era kind of approach to life. So it's a sort of blending of the two approaches, I think. And the other interesting thing that I hadn't really appreciated, not having read this before, is that the original model work was done in-house, but then for the actual filming model, that model was then transferred to ILM. So ILM did the final pass of everything and sort of tweaked the original design, and that was just the way it was sort of they were set up to do it. So it's a clever way of doing it. And then they had someone completely different called James Klein doing the interior work, and it was the guy who was designing the exterior actually got the interior look to influence him in the exterior design. So it was a bit chicken and egg, or egg and chicken, depending on which way you look at it, But again, it's a very different interior design to the Enterprises. And at one point, they did this sort of original series, very, very smooth look. But then but when ILM got hold of it, they added a lot more detail, because they found out that the ship was going to have to be very, very sort of close up very early in the movie. So they had to do a really, really detailed model so it would stand up to being looked at very, very closely. So again, that requires a different level of model design than might otherwise have been the case. Again, this is the difference between that's sort of the original shuttle bay doors for the Kelvin, and then that's the version that ILM ended up actually doing, where it looks like they can do a little bit more with it. And again, it doesn't look like a huge ship, because it doesn't have the sort of secondary hull type that we're used to seeing. And yet, when you actually look at the length of the nacelle there, and sort of, it does have quite a large secondary hull. So I think that's why it's actually got that many shuttles in it and so on, because actually it's probably bigger than it feels in many respects. And the problem was, because it was so dwarfed by the Narada when it came out of the gravimetric disturbance, aka a black hole kind of thing, you sort of get the impression it's tiny because it's up against a much bigger vessel from the future. But actually, it's still quite a sizable ship in and of itself. It's just that the scaling in space is always a bit of an issue, of course, because you don't have things for reference. And here we have the poor thing getting chunks blown off it, of course, in fairly short order. But again, interestingly, they were saying that whereas they would have swapped in another CG model with sort of the damage attached to it, what they actually did was develop a system whereby they could swap out specific areas of the ship to switch into battle damaged mode, basically. And apparently that let them do it faster. So I guess it's 2009, it would still have been a bit tricky to do it otherwise in really sort of photorealistic stuff. But that just makes me chuckle. It just looks so tiny when you look at it like that, because you don't have the twin nacelles kind of bulking it out. It just looks really, really fragile. It's a strange thing. They're also saying as well that a lot of this sort of panel detailing here, they wanted it to look as if panels had been sort of welded over the originals that had taken damage. So it intentionally looks beaten up and, for want of a better word, weathered. Although of course there is no weather in space, so it can't be weathered as such. But you know what I mean. So that was the special issue magazine, and here we have the special issue model. Now, let's have a look at this, because as I say, I don't have many of these, but they will benefit from the fact that they're being based off very, very modern CG models. Well, I say very modern, I mean, it's not modern now, but, you know, relatively speaking. The good old-fashioned Perspex protection that they used to use in the Eaglemoss products. And I'm hoping that I can extract it using the nacelle without damage, because you can't really grab it any other way. Nice and heavy. So this is a fairly standard Eaglemoss approach. At least the saucer section is very, very heavy, and that is very, very wobbly. Good Lord, Eaglemoss. That is weird. That's really the underside of the saucer is very plasticky and it's very wobbly. You can probably see that giving. I'm trying to hold it still, but all of this is, you see how the edge is moving there when I press it down. That's very wobbly. Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, had I paid a significant amount of money for that, I would not have been happy with that as a concept. That just feels really poor. Unusual for Eaglemoss in my experience. That's that sort of thing in terms of an actual fundamental part of the model. You know, for it not to be properly glued on in a sense, that seems very, very unnecessary in terms of quality control. But let's pop. I assume it's one of these jobs. So I mean, you know, it's well packaged. You wouldn't think with this much sort of styrofoam stuff around it, it would take any real damage that would give it a knock big enough to make it that unstable. But unfortunately, it rather is. I mean, the navigational deflectors are okay, and it's suitably blue. Although again, it's kind of I don't think there's a lot of detail on that. It looks rather like a cheap bit of blue plastic has just been sort of pasted onto it. And I think it's too light. I don't know. I mean, again, that's maybe a lighting issue, but it's almost sort of lighter than those images that we were just looking at in the magazine, which is kind of odd. I would have thought they'd have gone for a slightly darker grey. I'm not even convinced it's very well seated on this stand. Maybe a bit further back. That's better. It's my fault. So I mean, I'm not a massive fan of this huge mottling effect that they do sometimes for the coloration of the whole plates, but I guess it is what it is. So overall, I would say it's not my favourite ship. I would say it's definitely not my favourite Eaglemoss model based on that feel I've just had of it, unfortunately. But if you want everything in the collection, then I guess you have to get these as well. As I say, I'm just glad that I haven't ever chosen to pay for it personally. But I would be very interested to hear what others think in the comments. I mean, there's even got quite a lot of sort of weathering on it. They've obviously added quite a bit of sort of damagey, sort of scratchy kind of detail there, as if it is a slightly older ship, which is probably intentional, I think. But I can see why they've done that. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll crack on with another in due course. Cheers for now.